So you've mastered the craft, you've shipped great work, but something is still missing. You're stuck at senior and you're not sure how to move forward. Well, if that's you, stick around because today we're unpacking the jump from senior to staff with Catt Small. We're going to talk about what influence really looks like, how to build a vision, and the skills that actually move you forward. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome. I am super stoked to have you. You ever ship a feature that should have never seen the light of day, or survive a sprint planning where nothing got planned? Or maybe you just said, let's circle back under your breath for the 50th time this week. Well, you, my friend, have earned a Merit-ish badge. Introducing the Beyond UX Design Merit Badges, a vintage-inspired sticker series for UX designers, PMs, and engineers who have seen things. Choose from 3 sets: soft skills, sharp tongue, Call to Figma Initiation, or the Pixel Pusher Survival Kit, and more to come soon, so stay tuned. Each set of 5 badges celebrates the chaos, the coping, and the conference calls that should have been DMs. Stick them on your laptop and flaunt them at your stand-up. Show the world you made it out of Q3 with your sanity mostly intact. Get 1 set of 5 stickers for $12 or 2 sets for $20 at beyonduxdesign.com/badges. Just promise me one thing: send pics and show me where you stick them. How often do you stare at a blank Figma canvas unsure where to start? Well, this episode is brought to you by Mobbin, the ultimate UI and UX design inspiration library. Mobbin gives you access to over 400,000 beautifully designed UI and user flows from apps that you love, and content is added weekly, so you never have to start from scratch again. Quickly find exactly what you need, search by app category, UI patterns, or even specific features. And my team and I use Mobbin daily at work to find useful patterns, and it helps my team work much more efficiently. And honestly, I can't imagine kicking off a new feature without Mobbin. So you're ready to level up your design process? Visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and never run out of inspiration again. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told your mom and them about it. So I am so excited to have the one and only Catt Small on the show today. Catt is a staff product designer, game maker, and developer. She's worked with companies of all sizes, including Asana, Etsy, SoundCloud, and NASDAQ. She started coding around the age of 10 and designing at the age of 15. She graduated from SVA with a BFA in graphic design in 2011 and later received an MS in integrated digital media from NYU in 2016. Catt also makes awkward video games, teaches and writes about professional development, and draws artwork of all kinds. And most importantly for our conversation today, she's also the author of the soon-to-be-released Rosenfeld book, The Staff Designer, Grow Influence, and Lead as an Individual Contributor. And I am so excited to have you on today, Catt, to help us figure out how to move from senior to onward and upward, staff, principal, and beyond. Welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me. I am so excited to be here. I am refreshed. I just came from a yoga class, had a nice whole breakfast. So yeah, we're starting the day strong.
I love it. You've already accomplished way more than I have in the first couple of hours of the day, so I am already impressed. So Catt, I am so excited, again, like I said, to have you on. I know I read that bio, read a little bit about you. You've done a lot of stuff, worked at some really cool places. You're writing a book, or you've written a book, I guess. It's coming out, in December, I think?
Yeah, the pre-orders are out now, so you can actually pre-order for 15% off. But then, yes, it'll be released fully in December.
Nice. All right. So we're going to talk all about that today. So I know I read your bio a little bit, but tell us a little bit about you. And ultimately, how did you come to this realization that too many designers are getting stuck at the senior level, can't move forward? Wrote the book. Tell us a little bit about that and how'd you end up getting there?
Yeah, I've been designing at this point for 15 years professionally. So I did start as a teenager, had like a fun graphic design career, and then fell into web design when I was in college. And then from there, web design unleashed user experience design. And when I saw that transition happening, I was like, I'm jumping on that wave. Yeah, I became a product designer officially at NASDAQ, and that was really cool. I spent a lot of time investing in understanding how to do user research, for example, and how to essentially create experiences that were actually delivering value directly to customers, ideally who would then pay for the service and have a happy little loop there. And then the more that I felt comfortable with the technical and applied skills, then I noticed that the challenges started to be a bit more ambiguous. Obviously, I was larger and larger scopes of work, but then I hit this point where I was working at Etsy. I designed lots of things for like millions of users at that point, and some really critical experiences that were essentially blocking Etsy from its next stage of growth. So, for example, one of the major projects was creating this feature called Etsy Payments, where it actually enabled Etsy to go from only accepting PayPal to actually having their own integrated payment software or a platform. And so that was one thing that was a really huge project, but there were several others that were also pretty large. And I was just trying to figure out, okay, I'm doing really impactful work and I feel like there's something that's missing. My manager and I, we were kind of talking about like what's necessary to get to that next level. And I would read through the career ladder and look at staff, look at senior. And, I definitely saw I was shipping, as I said, large scales of impact, but there was just something that was missing. Like my manager mentioned things like influence, for example, and I didn't really understand what that meant. It was a very hand wave kind of thing where if you see it, then. And so I, for a while to figure out like, what the heck is that? And I got to the point, honestly, where I ended up switching roles. And that was actually how I got into my first position as a staff designer. And once I was in the position, I was like, okay, got it. That's the difference. I see it now. I feel it. I'm in it. And at that point, there weren't really any resources to help break down what does influence mean? Like, how do you work at that level? How do you set yourself up for success? So I just went through lots of stumbling blocks. And then shout outs to Brian Lovin for creating a website called staff.design, because I think it was about 2021, that was like my lifeline. I was like a year into the position of being a staff designer. And finally, there was a resource available. But I was looking at the engineering practice, and they have books on this subject. So they have a staff engineer book or two. And there's people like Tanya Riley and Katie Seiler Miller and a couple other folks that I know, like Allie Jones, for example, who have just been really paving the way in terms of staff engineering. And I wasn't seeing that on the design side. So I was like, you know what? If I get the opportunity, then I would love to actually write a book on this topic. And so I had been in conversation with Rosenfeld Media back and forth about some other things. We had actually had a longstanding working relationship in that I used to be on their editorial board. So I'd seen proposals for books come through. And one day Lou Rosenfeld was like, do you have an idea? And I was like, I don't know, man. Maybe.
Got something.
I got something maybe. And so conveniently, around the time that we were workshopping ideas, Maven had actually reached out to me about teaching a course about design leadership. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to just see what happens if I put a survey out there and get some feedback about what people want to know. And it turned out that a lot of people really wanted to understand in more detail what the heck is a staff designer. And so I was like, all right, let me build the outline for this. And also maybe that syllabus turns into the book. And Lou was like, that sounds awesome. It seems 400 plus people were like, sign me up for this course. So that's a pretty good number of people expressing interest in the topic. And yeah, it's been a great process. I got to interview tons of people, about almost 30 people in total, about the subject of being a staff designer, also being a principal designer. And then I also spoke to some people who manage staff designers about like the difference between senior and staff. So it was a great retrospective on my own career and kind of like to look back at a lot of the things that I could have improved upon or the things that I was struggling with, and then also getting to reflect with other people about the same topic.
Yeah, I love this. All right, so you mentioned a few things in here. I want to dig into each of these a little bit as we go, specifically around influence and this being very nebulous and like a buzzword. I'll know it when I see it, but what does that really mean? We're going to dig into that in a minute. But before we do that, I want to sort of set the expectation of what staff actually is versus something like senior. So, a lot of junior designers are like, oh, I just want to make it senior. What does that even really mean when you think about senior? If we could level set for everybody listening, what is the difference in your opinion from senior and staff? And then maybe even we could talk about beyond. You mentioned principal, but the main differences between, at least senior and staff. What do you think when you think about that?
Totally. Yeah. So senior, I tell a lot of people like being a senior level is pretty sweet because you get to ship really challenging solutions to really challenging problems. You probably are delivering a fairly contained scope of a problem, though. So if I think about what a staff designer is doing, that person's probably owning an entire product area. And then a senior designer is probably taking a fairly large chunk of that problem space. So, say, for example, that somebody is in charge of owning the end to end experience of actually creating, say that you work at a music company or something like that, and they want to have a new streaming service, and you have to figure out how to get people to subscribe to the streaming service. You have to figure out how to pay the creators who are benefiting from the streaming service. You have to figure out how the actual onboarding experience works for the people listening once they have the new subscription. There's all kinds of stuff. A staff designer is figuring out like all of those solutions at a really high level. How do we make sure that all the pieces fit together into a new streaming service that somebody can pay for and listen to and sign up to be a part of? That's a lot of stuff there. A senior designer is probably taking the payment experience. Like, how do you go from learning about this new streaming service to actually checking out? And then once you check out, you hand it to maybe another designer who's thinking about onboarding. And so it's a fair amount of work, but it's not like hugely overwhelming. Like, it's a relatively defined scope. And if you think about being a mid-level designer, then maybe you're like thinking about one page in that experience. But as a senior designer, you can actually own like the end to end of the person learns about it. They click like, I want to learn more. I want to actually purchase this. Then I want to like put in my payment information and select my tier. Like all of that stuff is something that a senior designer can think about the end-to-end experience of. But then the level above that is, okay, like, what the heck are we doing here? Like, why? Let's define the whole thing. Let's make sure that we really have the right level of scope. What is the MVP of like each part of these different actions that somebody should be able to perform? It is much more nebulous and ambiguous. So that's like a big thing is the scope of work. I will also say that one thing I recognized pretty immediately between senior and staff is there's a lot more politicking at the staff level. And that's because you are generally working with directors, for example, and you're working on problems that are sometimes like life or death for a business. It's just going to involve a lot more emotions. It's going to involve a lot more disagreements and like navigating and facilitating conversations that maybe are stressful or like spicy. And you have to really understand what people's motivations are and then how to find the overlaps between different people's motivations and like how to resolve differences between like different organizations' goals. For example, there have been lots of times where the product org has one opinion, like design has like another set of goals that they care about. Engineering's got their perspective, and you have to figure out, how do I get these three directors to agree on how we're going to move forward when they all have very different perspectives? So that's a big thing. Whereas when I was senior, I'd be like, oh, I hate politics. I'm allergic to politics. I could actually get away with talking like that. But it turns out that that really holds you back at a certain point. And that is in reflection what my manager was talking about when it came to influence, for example. Like I was just so focused on honestly like my role on the team. And I'd be like, oh, like my PM's not showing up well enough. I'm just going to whatever. I just was so focused on like shipping my little corner of whatever the larger like end-to-end product was. I just wasn't really focused on like, how do I exist within the rest of these people? What's my role? What is everybody bringing to the table? Like, how do we fit this all together? And I think I just was able to not care about that stuff. But once you get to staff, it is in your face like all the time.
So let me ask you this. When you're describing, this is something, I'm actually staff at where I work today. And it's funny, it's like exactly like my job, all the politicking and all that stuff, completely ambiguous. I'm like, what am I doing? I have no idea. Some days I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do next? I feel like I'm a failure sometimes, to be perfectly honest.
It's like they let you in there, like, what?
Yeah, and then boss like, hey, great job. I'm like, seriously? I'm like,
What?
okay, great. But something I want to ask you here is related to titles, and something that I think we've seen across the board in software, even just engineering side, titles tend to be all over the place. I've also seen a lot of design lead roles and things like that. Do you see a staff designer and lead designer as being very similar? Do you think they're different, or are there just two names for the same role? What do you think?
Yeah. My opinion is that they are mostly the same in that usually a staff designer and a lead designer are both owning a particular product area. It obviously depends on the size of the company. So like the larger a company, like there's going to be different scopes of work that are considered quote unquote large because there's a larger user base probably. That being said, yeah, usually a lead designer is also responsible for approximately the same scope. However, what I've seen is that usually a lead designer tends to be a player coach. So like they probably have one or two direct reports. And usually a staff designer does not have direct reports. That's like a really important distinction between the two positions. Yeah, most of the places that I have either worked where there was like a lead designer or like most of my friends who are lead designers, they have a couple of reports. Usually it's two at maximum, but they still have that like bigger responsibility. So yeah, I think they're like very like you can shift between the both of them. But I think that a challenge for lead designers is that they have to figure out how good of a manager they can be while also shipping staff level work. And I just think that most staff designers don't have to worry about that. And I know we mentioned principal as well. I want to also call out that like some companies have different org structures. So the level above senior sometimes is principal at certain companies in name. But that if that's like the level right above senior, then usually that's probably the same as staff. And so I've seen some people transition to a company where the level above senior is staff and then principal is above staff. And they'll be like, oh my God, like, why did I take a level down? It's like, you didn't. Like, the org design has different naming and it's just like a whole thing. And like at a company where staff is below principal, there's just going to be, I mean, like the work that you're doing at the principal level is usually what is the next step of the business. Like these are large companies that have probably been around for 15 plus years, like Yahoo and like Google and like companies like that. They have principal level roles that are actually like above staff. Sometimes it's also called senior staff. Like at Etsy, they call it senior staff. You're doing some stuff that's like in space a lot of the time, altitude wise. You're just like deeply existential at a level that I'm personally not really ready for. I'm like I don't want to be thinking about like, what is the next step for this public company in 5 to 10 years. I'm good with my particular slice of a product area or, you know, my 0 to 1 project. Like I love that kind of stuff. But then at a certain level, it just gets so existential. But there's some really cool people out there who are working at this level. Nico Matson is somebody I talked to for the book. And then Tom Takigayama is also a really great principal level designer. I didn't talk to Rachel Shung for this book, but I have been on panels with Rachel, and she's also thinking very deeply about the future of like machine learning and AI and Etsy. So these people are just really paving the way for the business itself. And then sometimes they're also like industry-wide impact level people like Gina Ann or like Val Head. These are people who literally like Val Head literally like is on the World Wide Web Consortium. Just like you are literally defining the future of CSS. Like it's just nonsensical to my brain.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Being in
So I'm
that
like,
position.
maybe in like 10 years.
One day.
One day.
High hopes. I think you could do it.
Yeah. It's nice that we have something to grow into. Like that we're starting to crystallize these like positions and understand like the length of time between them and stuff like that. And the scales, it's really cool to be a part of that conversation.
So you mentioned org design a second ago, and this is something I want to talk about before we start moving on about how to get there. But one of the things that's really interesting, and I think we've seen this a lot, is some orgs will have incorrect leveling and you'll be over leveled. You go to another company and you end up being very much lower, but you were hired another place and you think, oh, I'm not as good. But it's just the way these orgs and the HR teams set up these levels and HR bands and things like that, it doesn't always align. So I want to talk a little bit about rubrics and how people can use their org's rubrics to establish whether or not they should be moving up to the next level. And if not, what is keeping them back? How do they know if they have a problem?
Gosh, yeah. I think you may have a problem if you are... One thing I've seen a lot of people do is they do a lot of like team culture building work, and they are maybe not investing as much in like craft, which is like actually one of the things that's usually on the like rubric or career ladder for an individual contributor designer specifically. And you may end up getting pushed into being more like a design operations person or a design manager, if that's the case, because Tanya Riley described this really well. Like she's more on the engineering side, but essentially there's a kind of person who sees a gap and then decides to fill it, but it's not actually within the scope of their actual position. And so when you do that, you're taking time and energy away from actually investing in your craft skills and like your visioning skills of the kind that you actually want to be building. So I definitely would recommend you analyze how you spend your time, because you may find that you are the type of person who does quote unquote glue work where you're filling in those gaps for other people. And you may have to actually start to let some of that go. So that's a big thing that I've seen a lot of people struggle with. I think that you may also have a problem if, for example, you provide a lot of feedback to your PM and engineer and other members of the team, and they just don't listen to your feedback, and you end up being like, I was right later. That happens to me a lot. And I think what I realized is that I was essentially highlighting every problem that existed, and it just started to become noise for the team. And so I had to actually start prioritizing the amount of effort I put into certain problems. I had to figure out which problems are actually worth my energy essentially, and really focus my energy on figuring out how to specifically target those issues and communicate around those issues versus just trying to fix every single thing. So that was definitely something that was really helpful for me. I think sometimes when you do a lot of glue work, people stop knowing what your job is. Also, a lot of times, design over functions to kind of fill the gap for product management, and then the lines become really blurry, and that can be a huge issue. And so again, if you're doing all this glue work specifically for product, then you don't have time to actually be a designer. So I think it's really important to hold people accountable without actually filling those gaps sometimes. Obviously, you need to stretch occasionally, and if you do, you have to name that. And so I think one thing that's really important is actually verbalizing and agreeing with your manager, for example, that you're stepping in to fill a gap for a certain amount of time, and you're setting bounds that you agree with your manager on, how long are you going to be actually performing in that position, and how does that actually benefit you. So I think it is essentially, I encourage a lot of designers to really step back for a second and consider, again, how are you investing your time and energy, and how can you optimize the way that you're spending your time so that you yourself are getting the best career reward, but also the company and the business is going to be benefiting from the best use of your time, because a job is essentially a trade, labor for capital. So how can we make sure that designers are being used in the optimal way? And when you honestly frame the conversation at work around that, you may also find that leadership is actually really receptive to you actually doing your job. A lot of the issues that I've seen really do just boil down to people being pushed outside of the scope of their role in a way that's not up. It's just lateral.
I'm going to talk a little bit about foundational skills, because this is something that's really interesting to me. So we hear a lot of talk about craft and how important craft is. Foundational skills as it relates to staff and beyond. When you think about craft versus hard versus soft skills, we'll just use those terms because it's a little easier to talk about. But when you think about hard versus soft skills, how do you compare the two? And is there a balance there? Is one more important than the other for that staff level designer? How do you see that relationship between craft and foundational skills?
Yeah, they are, in my mind, equally important, because as a staff designer, you have to be better and faster than a senior designer at creating artifacts of design. So you are just expected to have a faster and larger scope of output in the same amount of time as a senior designer, because you just have more time. So you need to be well practiced. Craft is a real part of the job. And at the same time, you do need to have really good communication skills. You need to be proactively communicating with your manager. You need to be informing lots of different people about the work that you're doing. You need to be looking across the different areas at the company to see how other people's product work might intersect with your own. There is a lot of stuff that is more about reading the room and making sure that you're accounting for people's feelings than, again, a senior designer has to care for. So I would say it's actually about 50-50. You need to be a great technical designer. You need to be able to make the right artifacts at the right point in time. And also at the same time, you need to make sure that you're appropriately managing people's emotions, because fear, for example, is something that really blocks teams from delivering the best solution to people sometimes. And you're going to have to navigate and manage a lot of that, for example. Or a lot of the work is relationship building, essentially, so that when the right moment arises, you have the social capital so that you can actually use it to advocate for your position. So personally, I don't think you can succeed as a staff designer without the soft skills or the those kinds of like communication skills.
And that is exactly why I started this podcast to begin with. I love that. I have this saying, you can't build great software without great relationships.
Yes.
And I think it's so true. Those relationships make hard conversations that much easier. And when you're constantly fighting with all the people around you, you're headbutting with product managers, headbutting with engineers constantly, when it comes time for you to speak up, are they going to listen to you? No one's going to listen to you at all. They're just going to dismiss you completely. Oh, Jeremy's complaining again. Like, just get out of here. And so, that to me, I love that you call that out. It's so important. And I assume you've probably seen this in your own career, but people that master that craft, do you feel like a lot of times that's those people who tend to get stuck, or those people who dismiss the politics? Oh, I don't want to play politics. But everyone else is playing politics. If you're not playing it, you're getting left behind. Is that something you've seen, like where people focus on the craft, but then that only gets them so far?
Yeah, and I will caveat with the fact that if you join a company really early and you are just like a really good hands-on designer, there's a certain amount of leeway that you can ride for a long time, just because you will have built up such strong relationships so early on and so much proof that you can deliver that like people will be willing to give you the benefit of the doubt sometimes and just be like, oh, that's just Catt or whatever. If you come into a company later, the standards will be set, and the stuff that was like acceptable at an early stage company definitely won't fly. And so you really got to be ready to come in and build these relationships and do well in the technical sense and also the communication sense.
I love that so much. You said something a little bit earlier about influence, and you'll know it when you see it, and you felt like that was one of the problems you and your manager were talking about. I want to talk a little bit about influence. Like, now that you've written this book, and I don't know spoilers, but I want to know, like, can you define influence more clearly and objectively so that it is not just a buzzy, nebulous term people throw around? What is influence, and how do we know if we don't have it? Because I think a lot of people listening might not. You mentioned people not listening to you, but how do you first define it, and then let's talk about how you know if you don't have it.
Yeah, influence is, I would generally define it as the ability to persuade people around you to do something that you would like them to do, or to agree to a particular idea or proposal that you have. And the more influence you have, like the more you are able to persuade the people around you. And that ultimately in the workplace means that you are like a more powerful individual because your opinions have more weight than other people. And a lot of that has to do with the relationships that you build and like the concept of social capital. Do people trust your opinion? That's one thing that's really important and like a critical component of being able to actually influence people. And social capital in general is usually defined as like you can increase it or you can decrease it. It's like quantifying like the strength of your working relationships in this case. Essentially, the thing that I think a lot about is, okay, do I have enough social capital to try to influence this person? And if I fail, like how much am I spending? If you are successful, then you are able to persuade somebody, and therefore hopefully your influence will increase because your social capital with that person's going up. But if you don't have a lot of influence, then essentially you're not able to persuade a lot of people. So you will propose ideas, they will either get ignored or they will get dismissed. When you are not in the room, people will probably not be talking about your ideas. So my friend Micah Bennett, who is also another incredible designer at the staff level, something that she said when I was interviewing her for the book is essentially that if you are successful at influencing, then your ideas will travel around the company without you having to be the person conveying the ideas, and people will give you credit for those ideas as well. So somebody may reach out to you later and say, oh, this person told me that you had come up with something. Can we talk about it? Like, those are examples of success. And so if you're not experiencing that, then that's an important indicator. Also, if leaders are not asking you questions, then usually that's also a sign. And what I mean by that is like they're not coming to you for advice. So I actually have a couple of directors in different companies where like we're friends now, but they would actually consult me about particular problems that they were facing. And that was a big signal that they trusted my opinion. And when somebody trusts your opinion, that means that you probably have some level of influence or you have enough social capital with that person that maybe at some point you might want to spend that. So those are some examples that'll hopefully clarify what influence actually means in the workplace.
I love how you mentioned sharing the work around when you're not there. Something that we do on my team, and this is not just design, but it's for the product in general. We call it a fact book. And it's just got like these are the analytics that we're tracking. These are the metrics. These are things we've seen in the past. These are problems we're trying to solve. These are business objectives that we hope to achieve. These are the things that we're working on. This is the stuff in our roadmap, and it's just a slide deck. It's got a few slides in it, but this is stuff that like some people outside the team, you think everybody knows this. A lot of people have no idea, especially if you're in a large company, matrix org, tons of people working on different stuff. People are paying attention to their own stuff. Sometimes people make assumptions. They might hear in a meeting, oh, I thought you guys were working on this thing. That thing was mentioned in a meeting. And then, they've got that idea in their head, and then they're disappointed when you didn't build it, or the metric was wrong, or they had the wrong assumption. That little fact book is a great way to just share stuff. It could even have like maybe some wires, like future designs or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, I love that idea though. Like you mentioned, figuring out how you can get something that people want to talk about, excite them. Something else that I'd love to get your opinion here. And I think this is maybe going to move into the vision work, the vision side of this. When you think about a lot of individual contributors, especially ones who do not have an official leader title, they tend to a lot of times just wait for someone to tell them what to do. And they'll wait around for someone to assign them a feature, and they don't really have that vision, that long-term idea of what this thing could look like a year from now or however long down the road. And I would love to start talking about that in a minute. Before we do that, I want to get your idea of like your definition of vision, similar to what we do with influence. Like vision, kind of a nebulous term. A lot of people throw it around. What does that actually mean? And how can an individual contributor contribute to that vision? Because I don't think it's always our job to own the vision or have the vision, but I think it's our job to contribute to that. So talk a little bit about that, if you could.
Yeah, that's such an important component of the role. So I do think another indicator that a person is ready to transition to staff is that they go from reacting to things to being more proactive. And that visioning is one example of being a much more proactive person and kind of taking ownership in a way that is conducive to good results. So actually being collaborative. So generally, when it comes to a vision, usually I would describe a vision as an illustration of a particular customer experience in the future. And ideally, it leads to folks being able to make important decisions about the product itself. And they can be done at different scales. So you can do a vision for the entire company. So if you're a principal designer, then maybe you're thinking about the entirety of the company or a huge product org or something like that. And you're thinking, what is this experience going to be like for customers in 5 years? And then you can work back from that and you can have a conversation about what infrastructure do we need to put in place for this to be possible. So that's one example of a long-term, large scale, but then you can also make visions for specific product areas and think about the shorter term, and that usually helps to inform a roadmap. So if you think about a vision that's like 1 to 2 years out for a particular product area, which is something that I did. I made one of those at Asana. Essentially, we were really trying to advocate for more investment in our product area because we had built this feature or this product area that was called goals, and it was all focused on goal management. And we were essentially pitching that Asana, the task management product, should invest more in goal management because there were all these ways that we could build this functionality that could be super helpful for people. And we were trying to figure out like what's on the roadmap for the year after, or like for that future of that product. That's another way that you can think about it. And there's also, you can do visions at like the feature level as well. So say that you have a particular piece of functionality that you think would be really cool to integrate into other areas of the product, but your team made it. That's also an example of how you can use a vision. So you could say, oh, we could put it here. We could put it here. This is what we think. Like, this is how we went about building it. So there's lots of uses for a vision. And what's important is figuring out like what problem you're trying to solve with it. So is it a question of like, where's this company going? Is it a question of, should we invest more in this product? These are questions that you're trying to answer using a vision. A lot of designers, I see them literally just make a vision because they were told that visioning is important. And what you actually need to do is make sure that it's useful. I know you had alluded to this a little bit. You mentioned, is it us driving it or is it somebody else? Usually what I try to do is I will have a conversation with my product lead, and sometimes they bring it up and they're like, we need to make a vision. And then sometimes, for example, I will notice a pattern in terms of the way that we work and recognize that a vision could help us be more decisive and proactive. And so in the case of the goal management project, we were trying to figure out the roadmap, and we had been just getting a lot of feedback from customers and from leadership. And these were like all very small iterative changes. And I was like, okay, we need to sit down and actually have a perspective about where we're going with this product. Because if we keep doing these little tiny changes, we're never actually going to make something that achieves what we're actually trying to do. And we're not going to get enough buy-in from leadership to actually get the level of investment that we need to make a quality product. We're just going to keep getting more customer feedback that this could be better, this could be better. So it was really me proposing to my PM, who I had a strong working relationship with at that time, that if we made a vision for our product area, then we would be much more decisive and be able to drive the conversation instead of being pulled along. So that was really awesome, because then my PM and my researcher and I were like in lockstep. We also had a product marketing manager who was a big part of the visioning process. And the vision that I created for Asana School's product is very driven by all four of us together collaborating and making sure that we were providing the right direction from every perspective.
Yeah, I love that. So what does a vision actually look like? Maybe it's different. Maybe it depends. Is it a memo? Is it a document? Is it a prototype? Is it wireframes, a vision board with just examples of things that you've seen that you like? What does a vision actually look like when you actually get down to make this thing?
It definitely depends on a variety of factors. As designers, we always have to diagnose what's the right context for the right artifact. For the goal management product, for example, I made a presentation because leadership had some context about goals, but they didn't really know the user, like the specific user for that particular area, for example. And so it was really valuable to actually give some context about today, these are the problems that this customer faces. And then once they use this functionality, here are the things that are going to be so much better about their experience. Presenting that in the format of a slide deck where we could kind of talk through with the narrative right there was really valuable. But I have also seen some great examples of prototypes, for example. People call them vision types nowadays a lot of the time. And so, yeah, it's fun if you are trying to inspire people to invest engineering resources, for example, or engineering effort into building out a certain experience that's like super future forward, then a prototype or a vision type can be really useful. I've seen people do like videos. If you look at Google I/O and Apple, like WWDC, like a lot of the presentations that we're seeing them do, at least some of them, like where they're talking about like, this is where we want to go with the future of this product. Like that is also vision work, right? Some designer, hopefully some designer that's like pretty experienced was like involved in creating a lot of that narrative that you're seeing there. And obviously there's a lot more production value when you work at Apple or Google and you're presenting to literal like millions / maybe even billions of people. But yeah, those are also visions. I have also seen companies that will just like have a write-up version as well with a couple of like screens. And then the nice thing about that is that you can actually turn that into a blog post, for example, and like publicly post that. So I think I saw something like that on Roblox's website where they said, this is our vision for the future of, how people are going to make and share games. That's also a vision. So definitely think the format depends on what you want to use it for and who's going to consume it.
This is interesting because I want to try to tie this idea of influence back to the vision, because I love this quote. I use this quote all the time, probably too much, but Antoine de Saint-Exupéry has this quote about inspiring people, and I summarize it, but it's like, if you want to build a ship or want to build a boat, you don't drum up people and give them tools and bark out orders. You get them to long for the vast and endless sea. And I love that as far as inspiring in the vision, but the thing is really interesting when it comes to practice. If you just get people to long for the vast and endless sea, someone might build an airship to explore the vast and endless sea. Someone might build a submarine. Someone might build a paddle boat to just stay by the shore and just look out. And so that doesn't translate to actual concrete results a year from now. So I'm curious, when we think about this idea of vision, it's explicitly not setting up a very specific procedural way to get there. It's just inspiring people and showing this future. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how does the staff individual contributor who doesn't have often direct control influence the people around them to get to that vision that they had in their head that is not a complete mess at the end?
Yeah, that's a hard one. A lot of times what I will personally do and what I've seen people do pretty well is once you have the proposal, this is where we want to go, then the next piece of work is actually having a conversation ideally that involves your PM like your engineering lead, for example, probably researcher, like you need to talk about the phases of work that will get you to that vision and what's possible and when. And so essentially it becomes like a negotiation, like a series of negotiations to figure out, okay, if we made a 3-year vision, for example, then what does year one look like? Like, where are we by the end of year one? And the thing that a designer can do, which is really great, is you can actually illustrate phase one. And just encourage people, if you have the energy or the time. Shout outs to a coworker of mine. His name is Chris Meeks. I feel like he was the first person to really drive this at our company. He made what's called a visual roadmap. And I've seen other people do things like this as well, but I just really love the term. I feel like the term is just so succinct. But essentially, you got to have a conversation about what's the first big chunk of work that we're going to do and like where will we be by the end of that time. And I recommend, if you have the capacity to actually sit down and illustrate each of those points out, like year one, year two, year three. And that's how we get, to that third year. Like you have year three already, but you need year one and two really. That's also helpful for leadership because sometimes leaders, you give them the vision, they're like, yeah, but then you work with PM and you have a roadmap for the next year, but they can't see what year two looks like. And they're like, okay, so how do we get from 1 to 3? Like, I'm confused. Like, they have a lot of decisions that they need to make. They're context switching all the time. They just can't like extrapolate. So you actually need to ideally spoon feed the information to them so that they have the confidence to be like, okay, cool. Yes. Like I'm invested. And then what's nice is you get to the end of year one and then you can reference like, okay, so we did year one. We're trying to get to year three. Here's what year two looks like. Obviously, things are going to change during the process of each span of time. But ideally, you're having a continued discussion where you're showing where you're trying to go. You're referencing what you did. Then you can like replan if it turns out that you need to make certain adjustments. Maybe you need to go in a slightly different direction, but there are still parts of the vision that are okay. It's definitely like a consistent, continuous series of negotiations. But the more that you can hold people's hands and like point to the vision and remind them where you're trying to go, and then help them build confidence that you're still going in the right direction through design artifacts, like that is to me the power of a designer in general, but especially a staff designer.
Yeah. The other thing I think that ties into this, and we talked about relationships, is something I think, and I'd love to get your opinion here, especially as it relates to a vision and getting that vision, seeing it through to the end. But I see staff and beyond, whether it's engineer or designer, product manager, whatever, as connectors, right? And so in order to get that vision executed on, it requires, especially in large orgs, cross-functional collaboration across many different teams. And often that vision requires another team that you don't directly control or even work with to do a thing as a dependency so that you can get there. And this is something I'd love to get your thoughts here. I think it relates to social capital and influence as well. But how does a staff designer use that connection capability? I don't even know if that's the right term for it, to enable those things so that things can move forward.
Yeah. Wow. The power of the occasional coffee chat, shout outs to a coffee chat, or like, if you work in person, you can do a little bit more. Oh my God, it's so good to see you. How's it going? Which is cool. But yeah, I'm the kind of person, and I definitely recommend that anybody who's at this level or trying to get to this level, you got to reach out to a lot of different people who potentially may at some point in the future have overlaps with you. You could do that on a quarterly basis to keep it manageable, like 30 minutes once every 3 months, very manageable, especially if you just limit it to like design. And maybe if you think there's a certain PM who's really cool, you can also add that person to the list. But essentially, I have all these warm relationships that I'm mostly just optimizing for like, we will mutually benefit from each other at some point, and also you're nice. Like those are the two vectors that I'm thinking through. I'm not like a robot. When I think about these things, I'm definitely like, oh, that person had great vibes and seems really smart. And that's one person. And then it's, oh yeah, I feel like at some point we're probably going to overlap. So I should definitely like consistently reach out to you to just see how things are going and then share what's happening with me. And then there will be certain points where you're like, okay, now I actually really need to work with you on this thing. And because you are already primed, you have a good relationship with each other, just like casually, then you can actually say, hey, do you want to sit down and like jam on this idea together? And then ideally through that conversation, you start recognizing like, oh, actually, yeah, like this is a really cool idea. And then maybe that person you can hold them accountable to like go chat with their PM and see, do we have any capacity to actually like build this, or like how might we partner as teams? Sometimes things are important enough that maybe that person's really excited, but they just don't have capacity on their team at the moment. And you actually need to like flag that to leadership. So then the two of you can go to your director and kind of start leaning on that person together. And yeah, I'm a strong proponent essentially of warm relationships and having many of them and making sure that you're like seeing any overlaps throughout the time that you're working at a company. There's going to be moments where you see, oh, that could be really cool. Send that person a message like with a screenshot or something like that. Like there's so many little ways to maintain strong, warm relationships so that when you actually need to lean on a person for a situation where you actually need their team to do something for you, they will be much more likely to consider it because they will understand how your work intersects.
Yeah. You mentioned something, the casual encounter at work where you're in an office, you run into somebody just coming out the break room. Oh, hey, what's up? I haven't seen you. How are you working on this? Blah, blah, blah. When you are now remote, and don't get me wrong, I love working remote. I don't like being in office 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. But we lost that going to remote. Those casual kind of things that just we bump into each other and the casual collision, if you will. You have to be more intentional about that if you're remote. And I actually interviewed Kate Pinkett a while back. I don't know if you know her, but she's great. She did a talk about this. And something that she does is she sets reminders on the calendar. Reach out to Catt. I haven't talked to Catt like I do. Or she'll say like, hey, I talked to Catt on Tuesday, like set a reminder for 30 days to just ping her again. Or, if you have a random DM, set a reminder to follow up about it because we get so busy, especially at that we're talking about staff IC, like meetings and delegating and actual work still has to get done. And those things are usually the coffee chats are the first to fall off. But those things enable so much of the work that we actually have to do if we're focusing on the craft and we're focusing on those pixels and the prototypes and going to those meetings and we're ignoring those other things. It makes it so much harder to actually do our job. And I love that you call that out because that is just something like we lose it. And I think it happens. You don't even realize that it happens. It just goes away and you don't even realize how important those are. So anyway, I love that you call it out. All right. I want to move in before we get out of here. The last thing I want to talk about is sort of just like a day in the life, the outputs, like what are we actually doing? Because we've talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about craft. We talked about visioning. We talked about influence. We talked about coffee chats and meetings and all these things. How does someone find the time to actually do it all? So I'm curious, when you're balancing 50-50 craft, hard skills, and the soft skills, what does the day in the life, what does a week look like?
Oh my gosh,
for you and maybe just we'll use you because it's hard to say in general. What does your week generally look like, if you can tell us?
Yeah. I mean, every day is so different. I will also just call out that in addition to, I mentioned like sometimes the staff designer is like focused on a particular product area. There may also be positions where you're like a firefighter almost, and there's an important strategic issue and you're like going in there and fixing it, and then like you maybe are with a team for the quarter. So that's also another layout of what a staff designer can do. I really like positions like that because it's more likely that I get to do 0 to 1 stuff and then like cleaning out ugly old closets that are like starting to get rusty or set on fire or something like that. Like they're just so important that we can't ignore it anymore. I love work like that. So I'm currently in one of those positions, but I think like generally my work still feels the same. I'm working on a 0 to 1 kind of product right now, which is really fun. And some days I'm like deep in Figma. I think at the beginning of the project, I was much more like, where do we want to go with this long term? And I had to like sit down and just like jam with the PM who I've been working with on things like, oh, do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? I had to look up like, what are competitors doing in the space? Like, how do we create something that's like different and yet truly speaking the language of the product that we're in right now? So that was more at the beginning. And I was very deep in Figma during that time, like Fig Jam, just like doing a lot of audit stuff. And then like I was having a lot of conversations about who is our customer also at that point. And like now we've figured a lot of that out and we've figured out like what is the scope of the MVP version of that work. So that's really nice. And then, we had some moments where we had to actually validate some concepts with customers. So we were figuring out a scrappy way to actually do that, which was really fun. I love the startup energy whenever possible. And I like playing around a lot with what are research techniques that we can use. Can we use unmoderated research in any particular way? Like it's a lot of the stuff that you're pretty used to. But yeah, I think right now, like my days mostly are focused on like, how do we make sure that we don't lose sight of the longer term of where we're trying to go while we are shipping the MVP version of this experience. So I'm having a lot of discussions with people, like negotiating with engineering about, oh, is it possible to treat this one component in this particular way? Do we have to use an icon? Do we have to do that? That still happens. But then also at the same time, I'm having a lot of discussions about, okay, if we make this sacrifice now, like where does that leave us 3 iterations in the future, which is where we actually want to go with this. And I feel like that is a big difference. Like when I was senior, I was just like, all right, like whatever, treat the component this particular way. But I just wasn't thinking about the future of like how any of my decisions were going to affect like me in the future, customers, like none of it. And now I'm like, okay, great. If we make this sacrifice, that blocks us from doing that. Do we feel comfortable with that? Is that something that we want to have a deeper discussion about? So yesterday I was in an hour-long discussion, just like talking about like one of these like tiny little problems that may or may not have long-term implications. And I really like getting to work in that way. Yeah, it's been really fun. I think when I'm working on a project that's like more about like how do like certain different concepts relate, like it's very different energy. Like I'm in more discussions with directors, but because this is a 0 to 1 project, like I'm mostly working directly with the product team. We just need to get buy-in at the beginning of the product or project to talk about our vision and where we were trying to go. And if leadership felt really good about that. And once we had the go ahead at that point, we just have to provide occasional updates. So it's really just been like Chib, and I live in Figma. Last week I did some user research, which is really awesome. And now that we have enough insight to move forward, it's literally just negotiation time until the end.
I love that. So this is something I want to ask, and we talked a little bit about this in our interview prep, so I'm going to tease this out of you, but the importance of delegating, because you've got, I assume, most staff level designers are not the only designer on the team. Usually there's a larger team, there's more senior designers, junior designers, interns, whatever. The value of delegating when you're trying to balance all these things. I'm curious how you go through the process of delegating and deciding this is something I need to work on or this is something I feel safe delegating. How do you generally balance that?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, usually I definitely do have some other folks that I'm collaborating with. It depends on the project. It depends on also the amount of resources that like the team has, the company has in general. Like when I say resources, I unfortunately mean humans. But yeah, like the number of people that they have to like give to a certain team at any given time, to use more humane language. And so I like when I work on projects where I have more support, like right now I'm literally like the designer and occasionally I can lean on one other person, or I can be like, is this really within the scope of our current project, or is that actually like outside of the bounds? That's a conversation I will have. And that's actually one big thing I think about, especially when I'm working alone as a staff designer. I will ask the question of just, is this piece of work that we're trying to make this decision about, is that actually like relevant to the project, or is it actually like outside the scope of the work in some way? And can we lean on another team to help us with this? Or is that something that we actually can reschedule to think about in more depth later? Those are like examples of conversations I will have, which are, they're also like delegation in a way. And it might be that I'm delegating to either a team or I'm delegating to a later version of myself, or, you know, somebody in the future will pick it up and like, I'm not going to think about it right now. That's what I like to do when I'm just like working as an individual. But then when I'm working with a team, so for example, like last year, I worked on a project that was like a cleaning out the closet kind of project where it was just like, wow, we have not looked at the junk drawer of this like particular product experience in literal years, and everyone can tell. And finally, we are throwing enough people at the problem to solve it. And I think I have 6 designers at a certain point. So I'm mostly focused on like setting the vision, like where are we trying to go? And then figuring out the chunks of work, like how we could cut up the pieces of work. And I had a design manager that I was collaborating very closely with on actually assigning the work to people. So yeah, we set the strategy with the help of a PM. And then I was working with an engineering lead to figure out like, how are we going to turn all these 80 pages into an experience that is organized and cohesive? And so that was a lot of the initial work, like really setting that strategy. And then over time, I transitioned to owning some of the bigger pieces of work that were part of that project. So I think a lot about like, where is my energy going to be most impactful? And can I take the largest, most complex parts of the project that would probably block or like just confuddle a person who just like is not as experienced? So I take that stuff and then I usually hand the things that are a bit simpler to other designers who maybe are less senior. And then usually what I like to do is I try to give them an example. Here's what this particular page could look like. have fun figuring out way more detail and like all the logic and all the things that I did not have time to think about. And I will be here and like we can jam on it whenever you want. That's usually what I'll do. Like still impactful, but less complex is what I prefer to hand to other people because like I just don't have time. Like I need to be crunching the most ambiguous, complex parts of a project whenever possible.
So let me ask you this. Do you see it as your job to help with critiques and design critiques and give your Catt stamp of approval on designs that ship? Or do you see that as the senior designer's job to ensure that high quality craft?
That's a great question.
Maybe every team is different because it's interesting. Like I'm a design lead, so maybe this is a little different staff level, but design lead, I guess it's just the HR band. But when stuff ships that's shit, they come back to me and they're like, Jeremy, how did you let this get out? So I'm curious,
Yeah.
is that something that you are also held accountable for as staff, or do you see that as maybe different from design lead and staff?
Yeah, staff designers are also absolutely held accountable for upholding the craft bar, as I usually call it, or like the quality bar. If, like you said, if something gets out there that does not look great, like people will come to you. They come to me for the same thing. They've been like, did you see this? What I usually will do is I will definitely be in every crit. And what's nice is then the design manager will still be there, but can focus more on information from other teams and pass down information type stuff and focus less on micromanagey type feedback, or at least feedback that would be considered micromanagement if a design manager was calling it out. So that's usually been my role. Like, okay, the spacing here is not cohesive, or we're using 5 different type sizes. Let's reduce that to 3. And something I talk about in the book is how to be a good design lead or a creative director when you are going to be accountable for the outputs of other people. And really, it's about the quality, less about are they shipping it. The manager is still the person who's accountable for like, did the person you put on that project actually finish the project? Mm-hmm. I'm responsible for is the stuff they made actually good? And I like that part. I will also, outside of crits, usually have jam time, like 30 minutes at least with each designer per week. So when I was working with like 6 designers, I did prioritize serving people who were working on really high risk work that was pretty impactful and complex. I would definitely have weeklies with those people, but then I would have bi-weeklies with people where it was like, okay, your work's way less complex. And I think you mostly have it. I kind of just want to let you run with it a little bit more. But then we can check in once every 2 weeks. And if you need more help, we can schedule extra time. So I think you can be strategic about how you manage your time when you're doing creative direction work.
Yeah, I love the idea of a jam time. I have one-on-ones with all my team, but it ends up being about like HR-related crap. But like the idea of like a 30 minutes, an hour just to jam on some stuff one-on-one without having the influence of other people. Because there's different people in your team speak up, some don't. I like having, especially the ones who are a little bit quieter, not as likely to speak up, having one-on-one time with them and let them like get their idea. Well, I was thinking about this. Like, I didn't mention the meeting because I thought it was a stupid idea. And they're like, no, that's brilliant.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea. I don't do that, but that's something I think I might implement. I love that idea. All right, so Catt, we've had you for a little bit now, and I've got 5 silly questions I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. Before we do that, I want to give your book a shout out. Talk a little bit about your book. Let everybody know where they can find you. You've also, I think, got a course that you're still doing. You got a cohort coming up. So let's talk a little bit about that. Give yourself a plug, and then we'll hop into those questions.
Amazing. Yes. So the book is The Staff Designer, Grow, Influence, and Lead as an Individual Contributor. Rosenfeld Media published the book, and yeah, it's available on pre-order right now, as I mentioned. So you could pre-order it for 15% off, and then it will be out in December. It covers a lot of what we talked about today in a lot more detail. So all kinds of things ranging from how do you actually do vision work? How do you influence people to actually agree to buy into your vision? Or if there's a problem that you see, how do you convince people to solve it? We also talk about foundational skills related to time management, because a big question I always get is, how do you find the time? Yeah. And then there's like communication stuff that we also cover around how do you show up, and then how do you also communicate your impact at different points throughout the life cycle of a project? How do you mentor people? How do you creatively direct? All kinds of stuff. So yeah, definitely check that out. And then if you want some live time with me, I also do have a course that is about the same topic. It doesn't include as much information about interviews and stuff like that. I just really deep dive in the book, but I do cover a fair amount of similar topics within the course. And then In the course, you get 15 hours, I think, of like jam time with me and other people who are around the same level. The course is really great for people who are either at senior or who are at staff. And a lot of times people who get to staff, they just don't have very much support. We essentially become like a workshopping space for those folks. And then the senior folks in the room can hear how staff designers work. They can ask questions about like, what do I need to do to get to the next level? So it's always a great time. I've run this course 5 times so far with 150 students in total. It's been so fun, and I'm really looking forward to the next cohort in January. So you can sign up now.
I love that. And you said that was on Maven? That's
yes,
Maven
it's
course?
on Maven.
Right on. Cool. And what's the URL to find out all that stuff? Do you have a one spot, multiple spots? Where do we go to find out?
Let's see. Maven.com/do-do-do. It looks like, maven.com/catt-small, CATT-small. And then /staff-designer. Yeah. Not the most
right.
like.
So go to Maven. Catt
Go to
with
Maven.
2 T's. Catt Small. There you go.
Catt Small with 2
CATT,
T's. Yes.
Catt Small. 2 L's, 2 T's. All right. So awesome. And the book, I go to Rosenfeld. It's out for pre-order.
Yep.
Just search for what was the title? The Staff Designer. I love it. All right. Well, I am getting my own copy, so I hope you are too. Please support that book. Catt's amazing, but also you'll learn a thing or two. All right, so Catt, like I said, I've got 5 questions that I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know you just a little bit better. First thing that comes to your mind, you don't have to think too hard about it. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Oh my gosh. The first one that came to my mind is Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and it's a book about game development. It's a novel about game dev, and I don't know.
Okay.
It's so real and yet so not real. And it's very much like an if kind of book. I love it.
All right. I love that. If I don't know anything about game development, so I might not get it, but I've never in a million years a novel about game development. Why not? I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's
awesome. So fun. Yeah. When I saw it, I was like, oh my God, it's me.
I dig it. All right. Next up, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
Ooh, there's so many good ones, but I'm going to go with Normal Gossip. I love shenanigans that are extremely inconsequential, and every episode is just so fun, and it's always so silly. It's just so fun how people fill their time with like silly little like messes.
I love that. Yeah, I have like a good escape. Like the world is like kind of shit right now. I think some might disagree, but you need something. If we don't laugh, we'll cry. All right. Next up, what is your favorite meal?
Ooh, this is hard.
Cooked or
I mean,
at a restaurant your grandma used to cook.
Gosh, it's funny. The first thing I thought of is I love French fries, which is getting harder because I'm getting older and French fries are like not a great meal but yeah, I love French fries. Shout outs to any fans of French fries. My dip is barbecue sauce. I'm not sorry about this.
I was going to ask. So French fries in itself, I mean, you know, is it the French fry or is it the dip? If you have an amazing French fry, subpar barbecue sauce, is it still as good?
I think so. Like ideally, the fry ideally is a vehicle for flavor in itself. This is very important. Okay. I have a lot of French fry thoughts, but yes, obsessed.
I have a buddy who feels very similar the way you do about fries to dips. And we used to work together, and he had a PowerPoint presentation that he would give at meetings about dips.
I'm obsessed.
Oh, it was amazing. It was like completely ridiculous and made up, like the history of dips. Like he just made up stuff. It was just so funny. But anyway, all the stuff about like double dipping and how to dip and dip etiquette
technique.
And things like that.
Yes.
Dip technique. Yes. Oh, so yeah, I gotta send you that.
Please and thank you.
All right. So let me ask you this: best place you've ever had them? Where do you have a spot? Do you have a go-to? You're in New York, I think, right? So you've probably got 1,000 places that you could get good French fries.
Yeah, I mean there are great places to get fries here. I mean, I will always shout out Nathan's just for the old school classic. Okay. You can go to the original, like in Coney Island. Very wholesome time. I will say that recently I was in Dublin and I had some really amazing fish and chips there. So if you want to fly over to a really cool place, then I would definitely recommend checking out some places in Ireland because they have some slammin' fish and chips there.
I love that. I love a good fish and chips. Do you do vinegar on it? The malt vinegar?
But yeah, I mean, again, I was just like, let me just throw some lemon on that. No barbecue sauce, but that's okay. The chips were incredible by themselves.
They were that good. All right. I love it. All right. Next up, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, oh man, I'm gonna be the most designerly designer and say Tokyo. Like, it's an incredible place for visiting. As a designer, I feel like Tokyo is, wow, is there a better designed place out there, probably. But
not that you've been to, I guess.
yeah, it's a very thoughtfully designed place, especially like the subway systems. I'm like a huge train nerd, so I love like a good public transportation system, and I feel they really got some things right in some ways. There are definitely, I have critiques, but I just love like not having to think when I'm on vacation. So like when you travel to a place that's walk up the stairs this way, like when you go to the museum, they tell you the route to go. Like you can just turn your brain off for a little bit and just hang out and just have a nice time. So yeah, also the shopping's pretty good. Although I will say Dublin also has incredible shopping. So I'm a city girl. I like being in a city. So when I go on vacation, I just go to a city also. I love to shop. I love to just hang out for a week or two. So yeah, I would definitely say Tokyo is number one. And then Dublin's also pretty great. I really had a good time there, especially thrifting. Obsessed.
Thrifting? Really?
Yeah.
In Dublin?
Yeah, the fashion scene. I mean, both of them have good scenes, but I was actually like positively surprised. I think my style is a little bit more aligned to Dublin. I just found some like really great stuff there that I maybe would have expected to find in Tokyo. And I still found good things in Japan in general. But yeah, I think the pricing was more accessible in Dublin, which was like very good to learn.
Yeah, I've heard Tokyo's really cheap. That's like my ideal vacation is going to like someplace and just sitting in the coffee shop and reading a book.
Oh,
like
joy.
I have kids now, so like that doesn't happen. It's impossible. Now my vacations are like screaming and yelling and corralling kids through like an amusement park or something. But my ideal vacation would be sitting in a coffee shop somewhere else, far away, and reading a book and hanging out and just getting a baguette or something somewhere. That's like my ideal vacation. All right, next up, last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Ooh, good question. Oh my gosh. Man. Wow. It's really wild that like they have such a monopoly on our brains.
Really?
Let me think through my tools. Yeah, it's a really good one. I start to think about some engineering-y type tools because I also definitely one member of the vibe coding generation, but also the Neopets generation. So we've been doing this for a hot minute. I do Cursor for prototyping, and I think that it's been really fun to essentially take a mock-up that I've made and be like, okay, go. Like actually, like here's product requirements. Here's my picture. Make it. Is it always good? No. There are definitely times where I'm like, how did you get that from what I told you? But I feel like it is cool because previously I used to prototype in code and it took weeks to like build something that I could put in front of users. And it is helpful to be able to prototype things at that quality level because sometimes you want to make something that creates user-generated content and it's just so much more realistic for the participants so they actually get into the headspace. So I really like the future of like some of these tools. Do we need to figure out the energy usage side of things? Absolutely, please. But yeah, like putting aside the dystopian portion of tech for a second, I do think that like we can learn a lot about people by making more realistic experiences for them and hopefully create better experiences that like they find worth using.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I haven't gotten into Cursor yet, but we have some people on our team that are using it. They like connected it with our Figma design library and stuff, and so that's really awesome. And I've been playing with Vercel and V0 and Figma Make and all that, but I've heard a lot of good things about Cursor. I need to get into it. I think it's just like the getting into like installing like NPM packages and all that stuff is kind of like a little overwhelming for me as a non-developer. But anyway,
I will shout out Elizabeth Lynn has a really good course about vibe coding in particular if you want to like have a primer and actually be like handheld through the process. So I just wanted to shout her out as well because she's great.
I was thinking about just like getting an engineer and like spending like 45 minutes on a call with them and having them walk me through it. And then I'm just like, I don't know, they have that time for that. I don't want to be like a bird. But anyway, maybe I will. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, I guess why not? Yeah, make their job easier.
Social capital.
That's right. I love that. All right, Catt, so thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing. One more time, cattsmall.com, I think. Is that your URL?
Yeah, CATTSMALL.com.
There you go. And find you on LinkedIn, and you've got links and everything on all the stuff. We'll put links to your book and everything else and your course in the show notes. Catt's been amazing talking to you. I had a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on.
Same. This was really fun. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.